It's my great pleasure to present you this webinar on platform competition regulation and antitrust, along with my co-organizer, Joost Rietveld from UCL, who's also the program chair for the interest group for this year. So Joost happens to be visiting SMU and a couple of other schools in Singapore, so he's right next to me actually. And as we all know, so platforms being a critical driving force for economic growth for many, many years. And the four most valuable companies in the world surpassing the $3 trillion mark, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, and as of yesterday, Alphabet operate a platform business model one way or another. In fact, if you look at Alphabet's fantastic, recent financial market performance, it's largely due to, them winning the antitrust case. So it's extremely timely for us to present you this fantastic and global lineup of leading platform scholars and to share their insights on platform regulation based on their recent research. So first up, Joost himself is going to speak about digital dominance and why digital platforms in particular, can sustain market leadership positions. And as we all know, Joost is the driving force and the curator of the very famous platformpapers.com, a fantastic repository for those of us who are interested in platforms, and I think it's a great service to the field. And next up, we'll have Chiara Feronato from Harvard Business School. She's going to give us an overview of evidence-based platform regulation. So Chiara is an author of the famous Dog Eat Dog management science paper, and along with her numerous publications related to platforms on strategy as well as economics journals. And then we'll have Maggie Zhou from Michigan. And Maggie recently has a few really important studies of the interdependence between platforms and the implications for complementors. So today, Maggie is going to further dive into how to govern interdependencies in platforms. Maggie also contributes to the field in her capacity as an AE for management science and SMJ, handling many platform-related papers. Next up, we have Tobias Kretschmer from Imperial College and LMU. And he's going to zoom in on a particular type of interdependencies, which is what he calls privacy spillover between platforms. As we all know, Tobias is a long-standing prolific platform scholar and also a guest editor for the very successful platform special issue at SMJ a few years back. And last but not least, we have Ke Rong from Tsinghua University. So Ke is a strong advocate and a leading representative of platform research in China. He also has close working relationship with the regulating authorities over there. So as an AE for JIBS, so naturally he's going to bring to the table a global perspective about digital ecosystem governance with a particular case and example of Chinese practices. And after Ke's presentation, we'll be having about 15 to 20 minutes Q&A with the audience. And like Lauren said, so please type in your questions whenever you like in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, in the Q&A box. We're going to take a look and we're going to call out some names at the end. So without much further ado, Joost, please take over the floor.
Great, thank you so much, Liang. I hope you all can hear me and see my slides. So my name is Joost. Just to set the scene, really, I'll be talking about digital dominance today, or why especially digital platforms tend to enjoy extended and expanded positions of market leadership. Liang stole a little bit of my thunder, but nevertheless, consider these five companies, Alphabet, Apple, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft, and consider the following three facts about them. First, they are some of the most valuable companies in the world. Second, they all operate digital platforms. And third, they all face or have faced antitrust allegations regarding their conduct on these digital platforms. Right? Google faces or faced antitrust allegations for its search and advertising businesses across both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Apple faces a US antitrust lawsuit brought by the DOJ, as well as fighting private antitrust charges coming from Epic Games. Meta faces a US antitrust lawsuit brought by the FTC for its buy or bury strategy to eliminate potential competitors, particularly Instagram and WhatsApp. Amazon faces a US antitrust lawsuit brought by the FTC for conduct concerning third-party sellers on its marketplace platform. And Microsoft faced significant scrutiny from competition watchdogs in the US, the UK, and Europe over its proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard. And then on top of all of these charges, we have both the DMA in Europe and the DMCC in the UK that have come into effect as, I would say, like ex-ante regulations targeting digital platforms. So clearly, digital platforms, at least the successful ones, enjoy very dominant market positions, and there's significant concern over their positions of dominance. So that's led us to question, how do firms leverage digital technologies to extend and expand the dominant positions of market-leading digital platforms? And we came up with this framework. This is based on work together with Melissa Schilling that is currently in press at the Academy of Management Perspectives. And really what we're trying to do, kind of as a broad catalyst, digital transformation, what has really changed in terms of how firms use digital technologies, and how has that both affected their isolating mechanisms, so the extent to which they enjoy competitive advantages, as well as the effects on benefit erosion pressure, so external pressures that can potentially erode their competitive advantage. How do these effects kind of operate in unison, and how does that allow successful digital platforms to extend and expand their market leadership positions? So in the rest of my time, I will talk you through this framework, hopefully as a way of kind of setting the scene for the discussion today. So first, digital technologies have really enabled firms to kind of implement and enact hyper-continuous innovation, right? So in most non-digital settings, product innovation tends to be rather punctuated. You have periods of marked technological discontinuity that then tend to be followed by long periods of stability, right? Firms develop their products. Once they are fully developed and commercialized into the market, there tends to be a period of stability. And this is also in line with customers' preferences, because they tend to enjoy longer product life cycles that they feel justify the expense of buying an expensive physical product. And also, you cannot update your physical hardware platforms too often, because you risk jeopardizing compatibility with complementors in the market every time you issue a next generation platform hardware, right? And so if you would lose your compatibility with complementors every time you issue a new platform, you lose your network effects. But digitally connected platforms enable near constant innovation, where firms can more or less constantly update their technologies, and then also issue these updates to the end user as well as to complementors. And so we label this kind of this shift towards hyper continuous innovation. And there's two key implications of this. The first is it allows for more uninterrupted network externality growth, right? If you can update your platform without issuing generational breaks, you can keep your customers on the platform, because you don't force them to make a decision about whether or not to upgrade to the next version of your platform. And also, it's much easier to maintain compatibility with your complementors, because you can also issue updates constantly to your complementors, and they can implement these updates without having to reset their network externalities either. So we have uninterrupted network externality growth, and that also allows for more extended technology life cycles, right? You can implement improvements into your platform technology into your platform architecture, and that can allow you to sustain the life cycle of your platform technology compared to a situation where you would have to issue a next generation platform. And the real implication of this is it just becomes much harder for rivals to leapfrog a dominant platform, right? There are fewer windows of opportunity for rivals to break into the market, but also the bar that a rival will have to overcome becomes so much higher because of this constant updating. At the same time, we're noticing that there is a shift in firms' learning orientation towards the demand side, somewhat away from the supply side. Right, so most digital platforms nowadays are decoupled from physical hardware products. Some digital platforms are downloaded and are then executed on non-digital hardware devices. Think of Xbox Game Pass, which is played on a PC. Other digital platforms are hosted on servers and are offered via cloud-based computing or streaming technologies. Think Netflix, and still others where there might be a dedicated hardware product. Firms have kind of decoupled the hardware platform from the software platform, right? We all have the opportunity to upgrade to the next version of Apple's iOS without being forced to then also subsequently, simultaneously buy the next version of the iPhone. These have now become two separate decisions. And so this implies that there is less focus on the supply side, and there can be more focus on learning from customer interactions on your platform by constantly tracking customer interactions and preferences, and these can almost be analyzed in real time, clearly facilitated by big data and AI type of technologies. So what are the implications? Well, it increases customer switching costs, right? If firms accumulate knowledge on customer interactions and then act on these learnings, for example, by updating algorithms, by changing how they orchestrate their ecosystems, or even by adding features that kind of respond to unmet customer preferences, it becomes so much harder for customers to switch to a competing platform in the market that lacks that type of customer-specific learning. Also, kind of at a higher level, it better enables firms to learn, and it better allows them to either anticipate or react to changes coming from the external environment, right? By constantly tracking customer interactions, perhaps they can pick up on shifting customer preferences and then make decisions about them, for example, by adding particular features to their platforms. And I think a really kind of poignant example of that at the moment is, there is this shock introduction of ChatGPT. It's really threatening to change how customers search for information online. Google, in that sense, is not helpless because it has the opportunity to also integrate AI functionality into its search platform, which would have been so much harder if search was tied to a physical hardware product, right? So firms can better assimilate changes to prevent their dominant positions from being eroded, and it is difficult to do this without kind of the requisite access to customer data. And then I think it is somewhat easy to see how these separate effects have reinforcing effects on each other, right? If we have uninterrupted network externalities, that means that there's more value offered by our platform. It allows our customers to stay on our platform for longer, which then justifies us extending our platform lifecycle. If we extend our platform lifecycle, we have more time to learn from customer interactions. We have deeper data. We have more diverse data on customer interactions that allow us to improve our learning. And if we then implement those lessons into the market by offering better products, better recommendation algorithms, added features, clearly it becomes harder for customers to switch. And that then again reinforces the network externalities that we enjoy with our platform. So to sum up, digital transformation, we argue, affords platform firms deeper moats, right? So stronger isolating mechanisms of their competitive advantage, and also enhanced adaptation that allows them to stave off these benefit erosion pressures. There are fewer windows of opportunity for challenger firms to enter the market and compete. There's fewer technology shocks that cannot be integrated into a digital platform. There's fewer untapped market segments that aren't already served by digital platforms, making it so much harder for new entrants to break into the market. However, hyper-continuous innovation could suggest possible Red Queen effects, where platform firms have to keep engaging into hyper-continuous innovation just because their competitors are doing it as well, right? At least when there are some competitive constraints into the market. And so while there is valid reason for concern, at least in markets with some competitive constraint, we should expect innovation to flourish, and we should expect customers to at least reap some of the benefits of that kind of crazy rhythm of innovation. I'll park it there. I will pop a link to the paper in the chat, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joost. Kara, floor is all yours.
All right. So this was a great introduction or presentation before my own presentation. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to try and focus on what we as academics can contribute to the empirical debate of whether this platform dominance is good or bad. Joost has beautifully described why digital platforms enjoy platform dominance. And I guess one of the responsibilities that we have as academics is to try and understand whether that is good or bad. And the motivation is really coming from what Joost has described, which is that one of the key characteristics of these platforms is that they aggregate tons of information about their users. Their users like consumers, their users being app developers, their users being sellers, and so on and so forth. And this information has a lot of value and carries a lot of potentially market power that can hurt other agents involved in these ecosystems. And just to set this stage, Joost has described the fact that there's a lot of antitrust scrutiny right now over the large players that he described. But for the longest time, we let them play. So before the recent wave of regulation, really the last sort of enforcement was over 20 years ago with Microsoft's bundling of their browser with their software. Okay, so there has been a ton of under enforcement of antitrust and privacy regulation. And so these digital platforms have been able to accumulate a lot of information, hence have been able to create a lot of value. The question is whether they captured most of that value or they've distributed it in a fair manner to other agents. Now, the question is what is going to happen? What is going to happen going forward? We've seen across both, Europe and the US, and Ke is going to speak to the context in China. We've seen a lot of scrutiny, either with ex ante regulations like GDPR and the Digital Markets Act, or with ex post antitrust enforcement, especially in the case of the US, around trying to rein in the potential abuses of dominance that these platforms may be engaging in. Now, it's an incredibly exciting time to study platform regulation. I'm an empiricist. I like to have data to sort of answer these kind of questions. And it's really hard to collaborate with companies on these kind of questions. I would sort of challenge you to try and go to your favorite platforms and say, can you give me your data? I'd like to study whether you give priority to your products over those of your complementors. I've tried, and there was a big shut door in front of my face, and not surprising, right? Because companies have every incentive to protect their confidential data and to protect their status. And as academics, we shouldn't be expecting that to happen, although there have been some regulatory changes. So for example, Article 40 of the Digital Services Act right now mandates that for pre-screened researchers, some of these large gatekeepers need to give access to data for academic studies. So there's some regulatory changes, but don't expect that to be, the way in which you're going to get highly confidential data to study these kind of questions. And so in the past few years with collaborators, we've tried to develop technology to try to study online behavior by basically putting software on people's computers, right? And try to run experiments similar to what an A/B test at an internal sort of company would be. Obviously, we don't have as many internal data as the individual company does, but if users give us consent to collect that data and be part of an experiment, obviously as part of compensation, then we can actually start answering questions that have these regulatory implications. This software is open sourced at webmonk.org, and if you are interested in potentially using it, happy to help you out. Now, let me tell you about a couple of applications of these, and depending on time, I may just stop on the first application and otherwise keep going. So we set out to try and understand one thing that is one of the complaints against Amazon, the fact that it gives priority to its own products over those of third-party sellers. That's something that's called self-preferencing. It is currently banned in Europe by the Digital Markets Act. And we set out to try and understand how big of a problem this thing is. Just so to set again the stage, in the offline world, sort of private labels, which are very common in many retailers, have actually been shown and proved to be very pro-competitive and a good thing for consumers. To study these, we tried to recruit participants through Facebook, and it was extremely expensive, but it gave us a surprisingly good match, at least on observables, with the US population in terms of household size, income distribution, and so on and so forth. Again, very expensive, but worth having some level of representativeness in your studies. We had about 1,200 Amazon users tracked for 8 weeks, and we collected a combination of incentive-compatible browsing and organic browsing. So incentive-compatible browsing roughly is we tell them to sort of search for products, and then with some random probability, but relatively high, we buy some of those products for them. And we give them whatever they don't spend for those products as additional compensation in gift cards. So they have quite an incentive to buy products that they like, but also not to spend too much money because the rest is going to come into cash. And then we have organic browsing. So for 8 weeks, they keep these browser extension installed, and they continue with their normal course of business. And sometimes, because they're Amazon users, they buy on Amazon, and we track what they're doing. For part of this experiment, what the extension, which is nothing more than an ad blocker, what the extension does is obviously randomize people in treatment and control. We have an additional treatment, but the main treatment that we're interested in is one where our extension identifies what are the products that carry an Amazon brand. Think of Amazon Basics, for example, or Amazon Essentials, and hides them pretty organically, pretty quickly from the organic browsing behavior of users on Amazon. So if you search for battery and you were in the treatment group, you would not see the products that carry an Amazon brands in the search results that you see when you search on Amazon. To make sure that we're not changing other stuff, we also have a placebo treatment where we're actually randomly hiding products in the search results, an equal number of products to the number of Amazon brands. But I'm not going to talk about that too much. It's really for robustness of the results that we're going to find. Lots of things in that paper. I'm going to focus on just one thing, which is the following. The first one is that just looking at how products are ranked in search results, there is evidence that there is priority being given to Amazon brands. Okay, so the strongest predictors of higher position are prime eligibility, number of ratings, bestseller badge, sponsored, and Amazon brands. But we should be extremely careful even to tell the regulators that this is not evidence of self-preferencing, nor that it harms consumers. Why? Because we as academics don't have all the consumer behavioral traces that make some consumers, for example, be more likely to convert for Amazon brands compared to others. So we only have sort of observables like the number of ratings, the price, the delivery speed, and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of behavioral metrics that Amazon tracks about whether ultimately this product is a good product for consumers or not. So to try and address that, we add some structure to sort of quite descriptive analysis. And so we can actually estimate a model of consumer choices so that we can really estimate that an observed component of utility that may explain why Amazon brands are prioritized in search results over observably similar products that don't carry that same Amazon brand. And then we can do a couple of alternative scenarios. We can remove our Amazon products altogether and see what happens to consumer surplus. And here you see a reduction of consumer surplus across all the main categories that we study. And some of these reductions are fairly large, on the order of 10 to 15%. That's not surprising. We're removing products. I should say that the removal of Amazon brands is much more damaging. It's about 40% more damaging than the removal of any random product from the option set. But what we can do is also we can demote products in search results. We can demote the Amazon brands in search results according to this measure of self-preferencing that is based on these ranking regressions. And so if we were to demote Amazon brands by 5 slots, which is the amount of self-preferencing that we identify, we actually don't see an improvement in consumer surplus. If anything, we see minor reduction in consumer surplus. And this is coming from huge heterogeneity in consumer preferences. If you just rank based on average utility, you miss the opportunity to give people who really love Amazon brands, and there's a few of them, the opportunity to find them high up in the search page. And so when we see self-preferencing based on averages, we should be really, really careful to try and understand how these heterogeneity in preferences that exist in the world is actually impacting aggregate welfare as a whole. So I have other things that I would love to talk about privacy, but Tobias is going to talk about privacy. So I'm gonna stop here and just give that as an example. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kara. Let me pass on to Maggie.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, all good.
All right. So thank you, Liang, for organizing this very important webinar, and I'm honored to be on this panel. So I'll be talking about governing interdependencies or complementarities in platforms and ecosystems. And I will focus on 3 types of complementarities. And then these papers are written more from a strategy perspective, but I think they will have implications for platform competition and platform regulation as well. So first, in terms of resource complementarity, I think pioneering scholars in the platform literature has given us a very clear explanation and description of the fundamental characteristics of platform firms, in particular, their strong reliance but also lack of control over complementary resources, and also the complementor's ability to multi-home across business segments within the same platform firm or across platform firms. And then this is going to have implications for platform governance when it comes to access control. So in this particular study, we examined a policy shock that are initiated by a New York municipality, which was intended to govern access by rideshare drivers to the rideshare platforms. Following the policy shock, Lyft started restricting their drivers' access to their platform first, 3 months before Uber followed suit. So during that 3 months period, you would, at least we, the co-authors, expected that Uber would benefit from this change because the Lyft drivers who lose access to Lyft platform might shift to Uber platform. What we find surprisingly is that actually many multi-homing drivers withdrew from both Lyft and Uber platforms because of the cross-platform economy scope, and which was removed by the access restriction. So this makes us to rethink about governance control. And we argue that antitrust regulations should not overlook potential interdependencies across platforms. Regulating dominant platforms might also damage smaller platforms by forcing multi-homing complementors to abandon both platforms. Platform firms' lack of control over complementary resources and multi-homing can also have implications for diversification. So when a platform firm diversifies into a new segment, the complementors can share some resources across both segments, but they also need to oscillate some of the exclusive use resources back and forth between the two segments. And such oscillation could cannibalize the existing business of the platform firm. So we study the impact of Uber's diversification into food delivery business. We find that following Uber's diversification, the rideshare business on both Uber and Lyft were negatively impacted. So again, there's strategic implications that we discuss in the paper, but in terms of platform competition, platform regulation, we think our results suggest that when we think about market power, consequences of platform diversification, we have to think about demand correlation between the existing business and the new business. If the demand in these two segments are positively correlated, the platform firms might end up cannibalizing their existing business because the movement of the complementors. So the diversification might not strengthen their market power as much as we think. The next paper is on technology complementarity. It is not on platform per se, it's more on the ecosystems, but I think in this paper, we study the competition between incumbent technology producers and a disruptive technology producer, but through their respective ecosystems. So now we not only study the competition between the technology producers, we also have to think about their customers and, more importantly, the complementors. So we study this in the context of a small set. Not only the satellite manufacturer, but also the satellite operators as customers and the rocket providers as complementors. And the small satellite manufacturers for a very long period of time face this new ecosystem emergence challenge. So for about 4 decades, the small satellite manufacturers, they serve small satellite operators as their customers, but they don't have small rocket providers to launch their satellites. Instead, they have to work with the large rocket providers, which are the incumbent complementors, to launch small satellites. So in the past, each large rocket launches carries one large satellite. The coordination is much simpler. Now each rocket provider, the large rocket provider, or each large rocket has to carry hundreds of small satellites. The coordination problem is much more severe. And these incumbent complementors face technological adjustment costs because of technological co-specialization between the rockets and the satellites. And the small satellite manufacturers, in order to convince or incentivize the large rocket providers to carry small satellites, had to develop new technology, such as the CubeSat design, which enables the small satellite manufacturers to put small satellites of all different dimensions into these standardized quote-unquote containers, which the large rocket providers can then stack them in hundreds and then launch them all together. So we think our results highlight the challenges disruptors face, not only to compete with the incumbent ecosystem, but also to collaborate with and leverage incumbent complementors to cultivate a breeding ground for the emerging ecosystem. And then the incumbent complementors, because they face these adjustment costs, they also face the dilemma of either supporting the new technology producers or be more loyal to their existing incumbent technology. And understanding this dilemma is essential for explaining how value is co-created across rival ecosystems during technological transitions. In the last study, we shift to demand complementarities. And we think consumer preferences can be represented along multiple dimensions. In this paper, we focus on 2 dimensions of demand complementarity. One is between customer demand complementarity. You can think of network effects among users of platforms. The other dimension is within customer demand complementarity. You can think of synergies for the same user or consumer. So platform entrants like fintech firms like PayPal and Venmo, they can leverage the between customer demand complementarity or the network effects. And as the network grows, not only the low end or marginal users are going to use more and more the fintech products and services, the network effect could also potentially attract mainstream customers of the incumbent service provider, like the traditional banks. And then the traditional banks can improve their offer that satisfies within customer demand complementarity, for example, by offering product or service bundles to increase the switching cost. So the general implication is that platform entrants can leverage network externalities and foster complementarities between low and high-end customer segments to accelerate market penetration. So in our setting, early fintech adopters, their lack of access to traditional bank services might have encouraged them to adopt simpler and more inclusive fintech technology. The multidimensionality in consumer preferences can enable or constrain the likelihood of winner-take-all outcomes in platform businesses that both Houston and Kira have talked about. And ironically, while product bundling is often viewed as anti-competitive because it increases switching costs, it can also be pro-competitive if it prevents winner-take-all outcomes caused by platforms. So I will stop here and then look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Tobias, now the floor is yours.
Okay, So I'm going to hone in on one particular paper that I'm currently working on, but it's actually fantastic because Joost, Chiara, and Maggie have sort of touched on several points that I'm going to be mentioning on. So Joost, you mentioned that firms can now collect data sort of constantly. And I'm going to be looking at the messaging service industry, where there is a big fight currently going on between WhatsApp, which is collecting lots of data constantly, and others that are maybe more privacy preserving. Chiara has mentioned that there's, possibly a degree of under-regulation in of large platforms, and I'm going to discuss the DMA, which sort of tries to regulate all sorts of things at once, and I'm going to hone in on one particular piece of regulation there. And Maggie has mentioned that regulating big firms might actually have negative consequences, potential adverse consequences for smaller platforms. And that's what I'm also going to mention briefly in this paper called Mandating Privacy Spillovers. And it's on interoperability regulation in the DMA. Also, actually, Chiara mentioned that it's really hard to get data from the big firms that are in danger of being regulated, and that's why this is a theoretical paper, which I'm going to try and answer or try and discuss in about 9 minutes. So let's see. So the DMA is, of course, a massive piece of regulation that has, been in the works for a long time in Europe. It's designed to curb market power of large firms, especially platforms, especially the services that platforms offer. I think one of the most interesting conceptual introductions or innovations was the notion of gatekeepers, which are defined as firms or platforms whose service is critical for a particular function, let's say. And what, of course, makes the whole story so interesting, and why I guess we're having a webinar on this and not on many other things, is that there's often a mutual dependency between multiple gatekeepers, right? So you may be dominant in one part of the internet, and then there's others that you have to use at the same time, and so on. So there's a really interesting dynamics between these different gatekeepers. So there's sort of 3 levels of this regulation. You have to identify who the gatekeepers are. You have to curb dominant behavior by gatekeepers. And as a third ideal state, you would encourage entry by new firms. So there's sort of viable competition, but also by new business models, because especially in recent years, there's been a big discussion that some of the business practices that the large platforms are following may not be fully desirable, including privacy policies, as Chiara has mentioned. So WhatsApp is one of those designated gatekeepers or gatekeeping functions, of course, owned by Meta. It's a so-called number-independent interpersonal communication service. It's a pure network good. So the value is greatest if everyone is on the same network. So that suggests that having a monopoly, having a dominant firm is actually quite good. But there's no entry possible if everyone is using the same service, and that makes monopolies maybe not so good anymore. Third, there is this data collection issue. So WhatsApp is very active in collecting lots and lots of data. It's a free service in the sense that you don't pay for it, and the data that you are generating is shared with Meta for targeted advertising and so on, which may not be desirable from a privacy perspective. Now, the question that we're answering in this paper is if there's space for an entrant with a less data-hungry business model, so a more privacy-preserving business model. And the question, of course, is if regulators can intervene to encourage such entry. And the DMA is very optimistic about this. And they say, well, let's make these services interoperable. That's Article 7 of the DMA. And so therefore, a small service can interconnect with WhatsApp, and therefore kind of equalize some of the disadvantage they have in terms of the overall disadvantage in terms of network size. So can interoperability help entrants with a desirable business model thrive? So a simple model, which I will discuss in about 2.5 minutes. We have two messenger services that have different business models. One is the data-driven messenger service A, that's the incumbent. We have a privacy-preserving, let's call it a non-profit one, service B, that's the entrant. The entrant makes investment into collecting and analyzing user data, right? So you can spend more money, more effort on trying to collect as much data as possible and analyzing that data. The privacy-preserving service B is passive, makes no choice, basically collects no data. We've termed this one a charity or a non-profit organization right now, but they could just as well serve as demand some price for the service, but they are not collecting data. That's the important bit about this. Users value privacy, so data collections by service A is a cost to users and of course a benefit to firms. And users differ in the value of privacy, so in the disutility they get from using service A. Users are also heterogeneous in their adoption cost for joining service B. This could mean that, if all my friends are on WhatsApp, or if I like the functionality, or if I like the integration possibilities with other services by Meta, then I have a fairly high adoption cost for the new service. If I've not been using anything, or if I know very few people on WhatsApp, then my adoption cost for the new service might be very small. But in any case, there's an incumbency advantage of service A, and in the simple model, we let users single home. We assume that there's a covered market, so everyone adopts. So the utility I get from adoption, adopting service A is a base utility. I pay for it in terms of privacy, and I get an interaction value for users on service A. Now, what's important here is this is the G. G is an indicator that is one if the two services are interoperable, meaning that I can message all the people on both networks. And if it's 0, so the two services are not interoperable, I can only connect with the WhatsApp users, right? With the service A users. From adopting B, I again get a base utility. I have the adoption cost. If there's interoperability, then I can access the entire network. Otherwise, I can only access my own network. And there is a privacy spillover that basically kicks in if I connect, or if users connect with network A, right? So in other words, if I send a message to a WhatsApp user from, let's say, Signal, then WhatsApp can collect my data based on that transaction. So that's the notion on the indicator variable. Now, what do we get? What are the outcomes that we find? Without interoperability, data collection, that's maybe an interesting, not fully expected effect. Data collection decreases in the network effect, right? So the higher network effect, the less data I'm going to collect. Why is that? I have an incentive as service A to attract users by increasing network size, and I do less to annoy them. I do less to impose costs on them through privacy. Okay? The market outcome without interoperability is that A has a higher market share and profits than B. These are the standard incumbency advantages, and these advantages increase in network effects theta. So far, so intuitive. Now, what happens with interoperability? With interoperability, network sizes get equalized because I can now interact with everyone on either network, right? So network effects increase on both sides, on both services, and are higher. So that's good. However, users of B that joined a privacy-preserving service now suffer from privacy spillovers when they message A users. So data collection levels increase with privacy spillovers and in monetization opportunities of that data that we collect. The second is completely expected. The privacy spillovers basically mean that I, as service A, have an additional incentive to collect more data if the privacy spillovers are high. And in terms of market outcomes, A's market share can actually increase in privacy spillovers if they're sufficiently high. and be higher than without interoperability. So here, what we see is that there can be a regulation that actually hurts the potential entrant or the entrant that we want to see in this market, because there's this negative privacy spillover. There's a number of future extensions or of extensions that we have done. So positive prices by the entrant, multi-homing, opting out, not messaging service A, for example. That shifts results a bit, but it doesn't really give a generous or it doesn't really give a qualitative change. I think what would be very interesting is making interoperability endogenous rather than making it imposed by regulation, and allowing for business model choice by the entrant. So what's to conclude here? Data spillovers can contaminate a privacy-preserving business models, which then lowers incentives for and the success of new and desirable business models. So there might be less entry by privacy-preserving business models with interoperability. And of course, well-intended policies, and this is sort of the almost regulatory spillover, that would have worked in the old world, where data collection was not actually the part of the business model, that would have worked in the old world, can now have a chilling effect on newly emerging and desirable business models, which we also saw with the implementation of the GDPR, which actually ended up increasing concentration in the market for third-party trackers. So competition policy, and that's maybe the broadest point I want to make here, competition policy increasingly interacts with other regulatory domains, with privacy, with security, with sovereignty, and so on. And I think that's what sort of regulators will really have to think about, whether there's a direct effect of a regulation and a couple of indirect effects as well. So with that, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tobias. Now I'm passing on to Kerr, our final speaker.
Tobias, could you allow me to share? Okay, please. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. My topic is about the global digital ecosystem governance. And I will focus on the three sides. One is a two-sided market, the second about data, the third about AI. So it's a bit more than one papers. In China, we're working with the big tech company and also the policy making. So as a professor, we need to provide a lot of service to them. Recently, I working with Huawei, TikTok, and many company I work with was on the American blacklist. So that's allowed us more chance to know those big tech companies. I also engage in the two very important policy in China. One is the data policy, the second about the AI plus policy, just recently launched. So I know how the way country to deal with this very important things. And because when we regard it to the platform, I know the platform, not the platform itself. We need to know about the data and also the AI inside the platform. So we can see all over the world that there are a lot of regulation or different companies, big tech face a lot of challenge all over the world. So Chiria, Tobias, Maggie, who's all mentioned about different antitrust. So I will focus on China side, but I also will cite some American side and the European side. So the first about the platform antitrust. So we just heard Tobias talking about the DMA. DMA, I know the European countries like to regulate a lot, and not only DMA but also GDPR and also a lot of things. And from China perspective, why they always regulate a lot, and why should we follow it? So sometimes we follow it, we indeed follow it, but when the government asks us, we said do not follow them too much, because they are no big tech company. We have a big tech company. American have a big tech company. So we needed to think about our own situations. So So, but when the DMA China, we have our own antitrust regulation. So this is a very big important policy. And this policy, we developed a paper on this. That policy was launched in 2021, and we developed a paper which was accepted by the management science with Daniel, with Dee, and Fenju in Harvard. And we found that when the policy issued, because there are so many big tech in China, and they doing some not very good behavior, like collusion, like pricing, like monopoly, this kind of behavior. And our government want to say, okay, we needed to break up this kind of situation. We needed to create some space for the small entrepreneurs. But the result is not that as expected, because there's a signal effect. When you doing very harsh on this area, maybe many investor and a small entrepreneur will say, okay, there's not a good place to enter. So this policy is not that as, because its original idea is very good, but the result is not that good. So when we as a professor, we wrote a lot of policy advice to say, okay, we need to reconsider about this policy. Maybe this is not the right time to do this. And the Chinese government is very flexible on this area. So after only 2 years, the policy change, shift. So right now we say we needed to more support the platform economy and to make it more sustainable. So that's a very important case. Maybe one antitrust policy in different country, because of a different country setting, so the result will be totally different. So we needed to understand our own situation and to adopt our own right method for this. So when we talk about after talk about platform market, we needed to talk about data, and also Tobias mentioned a lot on the data, and I also wrote a paper on the cross-border data transfer, and we acknowledge that the European country, EU, are very dedicated, are very diligent on the data policy making, and we find that the pattern are different all over the world, from the American perspective, European perspective, and China perspective, because your USA country, they have the bigger four company, we call them MAGA, FAGA, the Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google. So they hope to collect all the data and transfer back to the America and to do more the data-based application. And but the European countries, they do not have big tech, so they are more conservative. But in China, we have a big tech. We have as strong as American companies. So that's why we think about this. You want to more freedom of data flow, or you want to more data sovereignty. So in China, we want to enter in the middle, not very freedom, but we want to control the data safety. So, but when the TikTok entered the American market, Americans started to say, okay, we need a data sovereignty. We cannot allow the data freely transferred. So right now, all the countries are similar. One side is development, another side is security. So it's a more mixed hybrid logic to develop this kind of data market. And in China, I want to share about China's logic about data policy. In China, we have two departments, ministry. One ministry is about control data security. We call it Cyberspace Administration of China. But another I'm working with is the national development of reform. So that's the different side, the different competing power of the data policy. That's the data policy I'm working with. We develop the data policy on the data proprietary market, data revenue distribution, data governance. So finally, the AI is so important. How we can better regulate AI while fostering its innovation. We all know AI industry was died 3 times. It was started from 1950s, but right now it's already 2020s. So many years passed. Why it's not very successful on the commercialized? We can see we have from the PC internet era, we're going to last 10 years, we go to mobile internet era. Right now, we are going to the AI economy. So there are a lot of evolution. But regarding to AI, we think AI is from the small model of AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now we enter the AI agent era. So everyone want to have some AI agent to help you on a daily life. And what I consider about the business model, I think the business model should be more layered. You have foundation model, you have an industry-based model, you have a scenario-based model, you have some application-based model. So that's the ecosystem. And every model, I think we could, from an ecosystem capability view, this one capability, another capability. You have a fundamental capability, and you have a specialized capability. You create an ecosystem of AI agent. But why the AGI didn't change the world too much? Because we do not have enough and very fit industry supply chain to cope with. For example, the hydrogen, the electricity introduced to the human being only after 50 years, then we have a mass production. So we need some production pattern fit our AGI. So we wait that pattern. But in the future, finally we come to the end summary. So how we can work with together, China, USA, or European. And we just heard the news. China delegates and American delegates was speak at the European Spain, and the TikTok was safe. TikTok so far are safe. So there are a lot of conflict on different bigger tech companies across the world. So, but I think the data and AI cannot only solve the problem solved by the companies. It's need the government together. So especially in the initial stage and the final stage, government should be together. But in the middle, most of the part, it should be solved by the market power. And I think we need to build up this kind of ecosystem trust on the cross data transfer or cross model transfer. Yeah, model transfer. There are a lot of road we need to go. And China, of course, because we are very strong on the AI and the data, we hope to set up this kind of platform. And that's why I also working on it. Okay, we need to talk, but thing is right now it's a multipolar world. It's a pity. But our academic people, it's more neutral on this. We could work together to develop a more comparison study between China, USA, Europe. That will be amazing work, I think. So China call on the World AI Organization, and I hope in the future we can work together. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Kurt, and thanks again to all our speakers. So we still have a bit of time for maybe a couple of questions from our audience. I see so many familiar names, our friends and colleagues in the audience. So if you want to just unmute yourself. Anyone? Otherwise, I'm sure we've got questions for each other. Yes, you want to.
Yeah, sure. So I had a question for Toby, and I don't know if I understood the model correctly, but do we assume that B enters the market? Because it almost sounds like your results would suggest that there is little incentive for B to enter the market if the the privacy implications in a way spill over, and there are no app-specific network effects, then it sounds like there's not really much viability for B to enter the market. And then related to that, could there be a world where those privacy concerns or leakages do not spill over to B? I mean, that seems like a pretty strong and important assumption in the model. Is it your interpretation of the DMA that would always be the case?
Great, awesome question. Thanks, Joost. I mean, we modeled the entrant in the simplest possible way, right? So we basically said, let's have the entrant do away with all, fixed cost of entry plus any sort of prices that they may want to set. So we made them an NGO, basically saying, well, what's the market share that this sort of non-profit can achieve? Now, of course, once we start including a fixed cost that has to be covered through some price multiplied by market share, then what we would get is, if the market share keeps on shrinking because there are these privacy spillovers, then eventually the entrant might not end up entering, right? At least not with this business model. So in some sense, that we're taking for granted that they enter, that the entrant enters. But of course, if we did add a few more parameters, then this would translate into less entry by a privacy preserving entrant. Now, the second question is also a great and very interesting one. I mean, remember what's happening is you've got more data collection because of those privacy spillovers, and you've got more, therefore that's also more profitable for the incumbent, because they can basically end up turning this into profits. So what one possible implication is to kind of mitigate the negative effect of these privacy spillovers is that you reduce the ability to monetize that data, right? So if I don't let you monetize the data that you generate from, or that you get from Leon sending you a message from his Signal account onto your WhatsApp account, then of course the chain would be broken, right? So in some sense, if you reduce the monetization opportunities, then the privacy spillovers as such don't kick in as much in the in the market outcome of those two firms. But that would need so the DMA at the moment does not foresee any further or any sort of complementary regulation to this. They basically say, if I want, WhatsApp has to be made compatible or interoperable, right? So this would call for more complex regulation. But I agree. I mean, we're taking the DMA at face value right now. There's a good chance that this regulation will end up being refined to kind of lower the negative impact while getting some of the positive impact of equalizing market sizes and so on.
Right, awesome. So we have a question from David. David, want to unmute yourself? Not working, so I just read it out. So David, from David Chung, David's asking how we should measure antitrust or a monopoly power in platform markets, whereas traditional markets focus on market shares or predatory pricing. So he was curious what we should focus on. Is the number of users, the number of complementors, and so on and so forth. Kara, want to give it a go?
Yeah, I can actually give it a try. This is a key question. I think, antitrust enforcement is quite clearly defined. You need to define a market, and you need to understand whether within that market you have more than X% of market share. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon. The question is, how are we going to define markets? And I think what platforms have showed us is that the sort of standard market definition of, the shoe market, or, the market for, cups, is not going to work out here. And I think there's one young scholar, Guy Aridor, who's done a phenomenal job of trying to actually create empirically driven market power measures and market shares, where you basically track what users do in the absence of the availability of a particular app. And what you see is that, social media apps actually compete very much with many other things. And so that's a very sort of data-driven way to understand substitution with other potential solutions. And I think that's the way in which we have to go. I don't see another way beyond finding empirically driven way of defining market powers, and at that point looking at sort of time spent, share of time spent, and things of that type. I don't know if others have thoughts.
I think adding on to what you're saying, Chiara, in a platform setting, you need to define both markets, right? So it's not, you need to define the market and measure market shares on both sides of the market.
Can I react?
Sure.
I do think we should really absolutely define those two markets very separately and independently of one another, because otherwise we end up with what the Supreme Court and actually, the Amex decision, screwed up decision, where cash does not compete with credit cards. I think that's a very wrong way of thinking about it. If I don't have a credit card with me, I absolutely substitute to cash. Cash is not a platform, but that doesn't mean anything to me in defining the market for payment methods. And then if you care about, the market of merchants, right, then you define that market. But I think they should be independent of one another. And it depends on which side of the market you're most worried about dominance. And actually the FTC complaint for Amazon has defined those two markets very, very separately.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then perhaps a last kind of thought. I guess market power or dominance in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, we've been kind of discussing it almost with the assumption that that is something that we need to address, but it's really about either the conduct that you as a platform engage in to misuse your dominance, or whether you've engaged in any unlawful activities to get to your dominance. Dominance in and of itself is not necessarily illegal.
Yeah, do we still have time? My point of view is about the size doesn't matter, because all the platform market are oligopoly. So the most important antitrust target is about the behavior. Do you have to do some collusion? Do you have to do some very aggressive pricing? This kind of we need to pay attention to. That's the one point. The second point is about we need to, because the market is very difficult to define. So I give you an example about the social messenger. So every day we use TikTok, we use WeChat, we use WhatsApp. So I think the time spent on those could be a market. So we can test the market by the timing we use on those market. Then we define who is monopoly.
Alrighty, so I think Lauren's reminding us this is going to be the end of this webinar. It's such a pleasure to hear so many rich insights from our speakers, and we hope to see you in the San Francisco conference, if not sooner, in one of the other webinars that the Interest Group and the SMS organize very soon.